Welcome to the 9th week of our class. This week we'll be finishing up Module 2, and so most of the lecture today will be a review of things that we've already learned. Today what we're going to do is review les verbes du premier groupe. These are the first group verbs, or the verbs that end in ER. We're also going to talk about how to form the negative, definite and indefinite articles, the expression il y a and il n'y a pas, the irregular verb avoir, and lastly, the days of the week and the seasons. When we started our module, we looked at regular ER verbs. These verbs have ER in the infinitive. Remember, the infinitive is the verb when we say to do something, to run, to jump, to speak, to play. That's the infinitive. To conjugate the verbs for the regular ER verbs, you simply take the ER off the infinitive and then add the following endings. For je, we add E. For tu, we add ES. For il, elle, and on, we just add an E. For nous, we add ONS. For vous, we add EZ. And for il and elle, we add ENT. Remember that pronunciation in French leaves out some of the letters that we see on the page. The verbs that are all in the brown are what we call the boot of the verb. All of those verbs sound the same. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, on parle, il parle, elle parle. The only two that sound different are nous parlons and vous parlez. When you're using the ER verbs in a sentence, you have to conjugate it with the subject. The subject is going to be je, tu, il, elle, nous, vous, or il or elle plural. For example, tu parles espagnol? Do you speak Spanish? Excusez-moi, madame. Est-ce que vous parlez anglais? Excuse me, ma'am. Do you speak English? Or lastly, elle est française. Elle parle français. And you can see here that my subject is tu, so I've taken off the ER and instead put the ES, which is what's required for tu. In both cases in the second sentence, I've put an EZ on the end of the verb because my subject, vous, requires that ending. Lastly, with the subject elle, I've just put an E. To make these verbs negative, all we do is put a ne in front of the verb and a pas afterwards. Par exemple, je ne parle pas anglais. I don't speak English. Tu ne visites pas Paris. You don't visit Paris. Or, il ne regarde pas la télévision. He doesn't watch TV. The next thing we talked about in this chapter were the definite articles. Remember, definite articles are the same in English as in French. They mean the word the. However, the difference between English and French is that because French has masculine and feminine nouns, the definite article must also be masculine or feminine. The third difference is that in French, we also change and use a plural form of the definite article when the noun is plural. A masculine singular, le livre, becomes les livres in the plural. A feminine singular noun, such as femme, is la femme in the singular and feminine form, but les femmes in the plural feminine. When the word starts with a vowel, regardless of whether it's masculine or feminine, in the singular form, we use l'apostrophe. L'étudiant, l'étudiante. In the plural, as before, the only form of the article that we use is les. Les étudiants, les étudiantes. And again, remember that you've got this liaison between the S and the vowel that follows. Comparer. Voici une bibliothèque. We talked about indefinite articles in Module 1. We said that an indefinite article represents something that is not specific. It's indefinite. Here is a library. We don't know which library, just a library. But the second one, voici la bibliothèque où j'étudie, is more specific. Here is the library where I study. In my second example, I can say, voici un étudiant. Here is a student, any old student. It's indefinite. We don't know which student. But in my second example, voici l'étudiant qui est dans la classe de français avec moi is specific. Here is the student who is in the French class with me. One thing that's important to remember with the definite articles is that you always need some sort of article in front of all nouns in French. Remember, a noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. If in English you might say, I like chocolate, we don't have an article. We don't say, I like the chocolate. We don't say, I like a chocolate. We just say, I like chocolate. When in English we leave the article out, in French, you should use the definite article. J'aime le chocolat. Another example, I'm studying literature. We don't say I'm studying the literature, and we don't say I'm studying a literature. We say I'm studying literature generally. However, when we leave the article out in English, it's important to remember that in French, you need to use the definite article. J'étudie la littérature. The next point in our chapter was the expression il y a, both in the affirmative and in the negative. The expression il y a means simply there is. It also means there are. It's both singular and plural. And the only way you can tell the difference is in the article. In all cases with the expression il y a, you're going to use an indefinite article. Il y a un ordinateur sur le bureau du professeur. Il y a une bibliothèque sur le campus. Il y a des cours intéressants à BSU. So, there is a computer on the professor's desk. There is a library on campus. Or, there are some interesting classes at BSU. When you make this negative, you need to change the article. Remember from Module 1, when you have an indefinite article and the sentence is negative, you either use D apostrophe when the word following starts with a vowel or with an H, or you use de, D-E, when it does not start with a vowel or an H. For example, il n'y a pas d'ordinateur sur le bureau du professeur. Il n'y a pas de bibliothèque sur le campus. Il n'y a pas de cours intéressants à BSU. Now, as we just finished saying, there are times when we leave the article out in English. When we do use the article, you can see that we do the same kind of change. In my affirmative sentence in the preceding slide, I said, there are some interesting classes at BSU. There are some interesting classes at BSU. If we look at this example, there aren't any interesting classes at BSU. I make the same change in English as I do in French. Il n'y a pas de cours intéressants. There aren't any classes. We don't say there aren't some interesting classes at BSU. The last grammar point that we talked about in the chapter was the irregular verb avoir. Now, earlier in this presentation, we reminded ourselves about the regular first group verbs that end in er. Avoir is an irregular verb, and what that means is there's not a pattern. With the er verbs, I could take any of them. Danser, manger, écouter, regarder, étudier, and simply take off the er and use the same endings, e, es, e, ons, ez, ent, on any of the verbs to conjugate them. That's not the case here with avoir, and that's why we call it irregular. It is literally a one of a kind. There's only one verb that's conjugated this way, and here's how it goes. For je, we change the spelling radically to j'ai. Tu turns to a. Il, elle, and on all share the form a. With nous, we use avons. With vous, avez. And il and elle, ont. As with the expression il y a, when we use the verb avoir in a sentence, we're going to use an indefinite article. Par exemple, j'ai un chat. I have a cat. Nous avons un cours de français ce semestre. We have a French class this semester. Est-ce que vous avez un cours de philosophie? Do you have a philosophy class? Elles ont des amis. They have some friends. It's important to remember again that with the article, because we're using an indefinite article, when you make the sentence negative, you change the article to de, or if the word following the article starts with a vowel or an H, to a D apostrophe. Par exemple, je n'ai pas de chat. I don't have any cats. Nous n'avons pas de cours de français. We don't have a French class. Elles n'ont pas d'amis. They don't have any friends. That's sad. The last important point with avoir is that we use it to talk about our age. To ask how old someone is, we say, quel âge as-tu? Or, quel âge avez-vous? Which is, how old are you? When you answer, you say, j'ai, and then the number of years. J'ai 23 ans, or j'ai 19 ans. We don't use the verb être and say I am in French to talk about our age. The last thing we talked about was the calendar and the days of the week. To say lundi, lundi is Monday, and so on down the list. Mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, samedi, dimanche. There's a great song on Blackboard. I really encourage you to listen to it. We talked about the months and the seasons. These are pretty easy. Most of the months look like English words. Décembre, janvier, février sont les mois de l'hiver, winter. Mars, avril, mai sont les mois du printemps, spring. Juin, juillet, août sont les mois de l'été, summer. Et septembre, octobre, novembre sont les mois de l'automne, the fall or the autumn. This concludes the short review of Module 2. In lab, please bring your questions if you have them and I'll go over them. Also, we'll be doing some review exercises in our lab class. I'll see you then.